Hey, what's going on, everyone? How you guys doing today? My name is Matt Jarbo. This is $3 Theater, and I want to talk to you guys today about Canon. Specifically, an article in Gizmodo saying here that our fascination with Canon is killing the way we value stories. And I don't agree with practically much of this because I don't feel that Canon is inherently bad and our fascination with it is killing anything. And allow me to explain. Because remember, back in December, the season finale of The Mandalorian, there's going to be spoilers here if you haven't seen it. I don't know why you haven't. It's the best damn show of 2019, outside of, The Witcher, perhaps. But there was this moment right here when Moff Gideon emerged from the busted TIE fighter holding the legendary Mandalorian Darksaber. The Darksaber was crafted and forged for the first Mandalorian Jedi, and it has been passed down since then, oftentimes being wielded not necessarily the best of ways. And to know more about the Mandalorian and know more about their culture and to know more about the Darksaber, you have to have watched either Star Wars Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, two animated shows that came before The Mandalorian, both of which were created by Dave Filoni. In that regard of being canonical, it got a lot of people super fascinated in what was going to be coming, what the Darksaber meant, and quite frankly, what was it all about? What was everything with Mandalorians? And it's cool stuff. It's good lore. And it's interesting because it tells a backstory. It's a good way of addressing it. So when I see this article here, our fascination with canon is killing the way we value stories, I look at the author, James Whitbrook, and I think, oh, you're a bit of a dummy, aren't you? But we're gonna get to him here in a few. So let's go through his rant. Let's go through the rant. So first thing he says, as pop culture we love becomes increasingly dominated by vast franchises of interconnected worlds and stories, so does it become dominated by one singular question from diehard fans. Is this thing we're about to consume canon to everything we've consumed before? It's an attitude that's turning our love of stories into some bizarre archival competition. It's not, though. You see, here's the reason why it's not. And he does say that canon's not a bad thing. We'll get to that point here in a sec. But when you think about stories, a beginning, a middle, and an end, the world building, the characters, their arcs, their journeys, people want to know what happens. They want to know that what happens matters. And yes, while we do get into these scenarios where we have long storylines and long arcs that are going to have ramifications and consequences, the stakes are going to build, fans do want to know what is considered canon and what is considered not. That allows them to determine whether or not they should be reading it. And they're not going to be confused by having different narratives or different timelines or different characters, because we can only really juggle about 7 things at one time. And when you're asking audience members to pick and choose timelines in order to maybe possibly understand where things are going and hope that they don't get confused, you put them at a disadvantage, and one that is only propagated by the writer or the writers. And I think that, yes, having canon is a good thing. Putting an emphasis on canon is an absolutely good thing. But he goes on to say here, canon is not inherently bad, of course. It can provide structure to chaos, and it can provide a sense of not just continuity, but stakes as that continuity progresses. The idea lets characters bear the impact of events on their journeys across not just one narrative, but many, allowing them to grow and change to the point that they might even be entirely different kinds of people compared to when we first met them. Oh my God. Oh my God, did James Whitbrook here, did he just describe character development? Did he just describe what happens when characters evolve and grow over time, and that it's actually a pretty good thing to the development of not only them, but the story and other characters around them? I mean, holy crap. Holy crap. What's he even going to be complaining about now? Well, let's find out. Goes on to say that there's still plenty of room for variety and interpretation and even a relatively strictly defined canon. Just look at Star Wars and the kinds of stories it can still tell despite the mandate from up high that anything told must fit into what's been established since Disney took over the franchise. But those stories benefit from the added weight of being definitive interpretations and events that flesh out an entire galaxy's worth of stories. But where canon, or rather our hunger for it, goes terribly wrong is when whether something matters or not becomes the base standard for how we consider a piece of media. Well, the thing is, the audiences aren't stupid. And the audience is no. Now, if you're talking about Star Wars and you're bringing up canon, you have to mention the extended universe. If you don't mention the extended universe, that oftentimes means you're being disingenuous with your argument in this particular format. The extended universe was not considered canon by George Lucas, but was considered canon by many, many, many fans. And this fundamentally caused the problem when Disney spent $4.08 billion to buy Lucasfilm and therefore the Star Wars franchise, that they decided that they wanted to then reboot the extended universe, but actually have it matter. It has caused a bit of an issue with certain elements of the fandom because they don't like that the Star Wars EU now became Star Wars Legends. They wanted all to be under one banner, and it is now, whether they like it or not. But again, Disney has at least been doing what they can on that front to tell interconnected woven stories across multiple timelines with multiple characters using multiple authors and multiple mediums that finds a way to work together. Now, has it been perfect? No, 100% no. They have very much violated some of their own canon from time to time, and it's probably going to keep happening. It just tends to be the case, but they are at least arguing it in good faith. Anyway, goes on to say here, it's an attitude that became predominant, not just when fandom circles itself, but when the media commentary has developed around these fandoms and the blockbuster franchise that dominate our popular culture. Critics and fans alike are now less interested in actually interpreting a piece of media thematically or to engage with why they liked or disliked it, but instead pick it apart and break it down to the base components of what are essentially its pure, unflinching facts. Google Star Wars or the Marvel Comics, and you will likely see many articles and videos with the headlines X confirms Y is canon, X questions answered by new media, or X things we learned about character Z in this new book, media, or movie, TV show, as you will critical essays about these stories, if not more. And before someone accuses me of throwing stones in glass houses, yes, IO9 totally does this too. Like I said, discussing canon can be fun. It can add a lot to the series. He's destroying his own argument in an attempt to defend himself, right? Well, you see all these articles, they nitpick the canon, they nitpick what's this, they nitpick what's that. It's kind of a bad thing. Oh no, but we do it here too, and it can be fun to discuss. Well, that's the entire element of it. Canon is there in the same kind of vein as, let's say, Easter eggs. Easter eggs are there to kind of notice something in the background, notice something that's there, and have it just be part of the experience. Canon can go a long way to really kind of explain certain events or certain things that have happened as a way to, flesh out events, flesh out characters, flesh out scenarios. And it's something that the diehard fans are going to love diving into. And it's something that casual fans can completely ignore for the vast most part. And then if they want to learn something, they want to just do a little bit of a toe dip dive into it, then they can go and find those articles or find those videos. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. And the fact that you're publishing this rant on a website that does it too is really hypocritical. I love that you acknowledge that it's hypocritical, but at the same time, you keep destroying your own argument while trying to defend it. You're British, like James Whitbrook is British, so you can kind of see like where he's coming at this from. I'm going to attack something while also fundamentally defending it, because that's just the British sensibility of things. Anyway, he continues. He's like, but this craving for it above all else is toxic attitude. Oh, there we go. Not just the way we talk about pieces of media from a critical perspective, but in fan circles as well. The hunger for facts above all else leads to things like filler episodes becoming a derogatory term for stories that don't advance the larger ongoing plot of a narrative or don't include some shocking revelation that someone can add to a list. It predicates the gatekeeping act of being a fan that is still built on how much you know about a thing, whether you actually enjoy that thing or not. It's an attitude that in turn feeds the equally unruly and consistently growing spoiler culture, because a fandom that values pure details above all else puts weight in the knowledge of those details. The need robs discussions about the stories we get of nuance and interpretation, because who cares what you think happened when there's an answer from the Word of God to that question you might have had. And more sinisterly, beyond the way it shapes our discourse, it's a craving that further our love of a world that is not the world itself, but to the masters behind that world. To twist a lit crit turn of phrase, there cannot be the death of the author if the author's got their own fandom wiki. Well, again, I just have to point out on that one, like, yes, there are toxic elements of all fandoms, and there are people that do try to act like gatekeepers of information. There are gatekeepers in literally everything. Those people are dicks. And always talking about the interpretation of something can be something that's up for discussion, whether or not the author agrees. But you always have to sit there and go back to what the intent was from the person who created it. You may not agree with that intent. You may not agree with that particular person's point of view or that character's actions. And you can have all the discussions you want about how you disagree with that, but you are still beholden to the creation of somebody else. This is one of those moments where you really have to sit there and go, look, if you don't like it, go create your own. But it's just not going to be considered canon. And a lot of people like the fact that these stories evolve over time and the narrative structure will open itself up. I mean, read something like Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series, where it's 14 books. He unfortunately passed away before the last couple books were finished, and they were finished by a surrogate. But those books are in depth and they are insane and they are full of characters and full of plots and full of storylines that you can get lost in. And I mean that literally. Like by book 4, you are like, what the hell is happening half the time? It's a lot of crazy stuff going on. Good, but it's still crazy. And then you get into the discussions over canon with certain people or the interpretation of Jordan for how he described, let's say, a building or a character or an event that's taken place. These are part of the fun of having those discussions. The problem, though, is that you have dicks, and the dicks ruin it for everybody else. But not everyone who covers this stuff is a dick. Not everyone who writes these articles is a dick. And people who just like to discuss the finer points of things and talk about the canon, their opinion and their desire to know more absolutely isn't invalidated. Now, if you want to talk about filler episodes, there are always filler episodes of something. It's not a derogatory term. It's a criticism of the current Hollywood system. Not even current. This is just the standard Hollywood system. Allow me to quickly explain. When you've got a television order for a TV show, right? Let's say one that's 13 episodes across 3 months airing on a cable network, you generally figure out the beginning, the middle, the end of what is going to be a single larger plot storyline with a bunch of smaller plots in between. The idea there is that you always have a beginning, a middle, and the end to progress the story forward. But as we see in procedural television, that doesn't ever really seem to happen because you have a much larger story order. In the case of most television shows, it's roughly about 21 44-minute long episodes. In the first season, you can always find a very procedural approach to this where every character, be it the main or supporting, gets their own episode. This is always in the first season because they are establishing the world and they are building it up and they are building up these characters. And then from there, they're able to then advance the story further down the road. At least we hope they will. But a lot of times filler episodes are just as a way to fill the gap because the networks want a specific order count. This is why there's problems. Star Wars: The Clone Wars is a very, 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 very big abuser of this, in my opinion, of where it's really cool that they put everything in like 3 or 4 episode arcs, generally airing with the former rather than the latter. The bigger problem comes that sometimes those arcs are just boring and they don't advance the larger narrative or really do much to give into where we are. And a lot of people are not big fans of some of those approaches. Those are filler episodes that don't advance a plot. When you read a book, do you like filler chapters or do you want the whole thing, everything you read, to continue moving the plot forward? We deal with this when it comes to having narrative structures and when it comes to telling narrative-based stories, and people want there to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. If things start to deviate for too long, like they ramble on, like I could be rambling on right now, then they will get bored and then they will complain about that because it's not concise enough. People only have one life to leave. That's it. One life to leave. Other than that, they are just, they can die. They only have so much time in this world. If you're wasting their time, you are literally wasting their life. And that is not something that audiences want anymore. We're not beholden to a non-DVR, non-instant, non-on-demand world. So yeah, people are going to want to be able to dive into these shows. And then from there comes a lot of lore. Look at Supernatural. 13, 14 seasons, I forget. Tons of lore in that show. Tons of dedicated fans. And they're the ones that keep it on the air. And they're the ones that come back week to week. And I've dealt with a lot of those guys. And guess what? They're not really that toxic. They don't gatekeep anything. They're pretty fun to be around if you get them drunk. All I'm saying is, I think you are trying too hard to justify what in your mind was simply just an idea. Anyway, your final statement here says, it's fine if you want something to matter to a world and characters you are about, or you care about, but it shouldn't be the be all end all of your investment in them either. Fandom is such a wide, shareable passion full of different opinions and interpretations about a thing, united by a shared vested interest and love for storytelling, valuing the sterile facts of those stories more than the things about them that make us think or feel is a sad thing indeed. But again, that sterile fact you're referring to is only what your interpretation of that fact is. You can find out what you might dub a sterile fact, and you can look at that as being something later on that provides with, oh, this now explains that whole thing that I didn't quite understand before. Now I finally get it because I now know the missing piece of the puzzle. It is such a nihilistic and cynical way of viewing fandom. But you're British, so I get it, James. I do. But anyway, I wanted to prove my point here. Here's his Twitter account. He's a news editor for IO9. Questionable taste in puns, sci-fi, and video games, 100%. And he's from the United Kingdom. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring up James' his Twitter account is because he at this point now really wants you to believe him. He really doesn't want to fight anybody on this particular rant. So he says here, while I'm begging you, read the piece, specifically the bit where I say that canon is not inherently bad. It can bring order to chaos, be a vehicle for character growth across vast swaths of times and mediums. It's the holding it as a sole validation of a story. That's the problem. Now, granted, he did somewhat say to that particular effect in the piece. You know, across all the paragraphs that he wrote, you could kind of pull that argument out. But then again, why is this outside of what was given to us? Oh, is this canon to your argument? Is this extra argument that's not a part of the primary distribution method, the distribution medium of your rant? Is this now considered canonical because it further explains in shorter form detail, but still detail nonetheless, about what the point it was you're trying to make? Huh. Yeah, I would argue that it is, James. I would argue that you absolutely fundamentally destroyed your own narrative once again. You've done this multiple times. You really should have thought this thing through. Now, he does go on to say here that if two things are guaranteed to get me cursing up a storm in the IO9 Slack, it's dumb blogs about X-confirmed canon, and also people who love to claim that they're good at knowing all the facts, but apparently also cannot read more than 3 sentences into an article. Like my dudes, yes, it's almost unequivocally dudes. I know I'm usually a little extra as fuck literary arse who writes thousands of words of nonsense, but it's literally the second and third graphs. Okay, so I went through his piece. I went through it. He clearly was throwing shade at Star Wars. He was clearly throwing shade at the idea of canon. So I decided to head over here to Star Wars Wikipedia and look up what they define as being canon. And this is what they have to say. Gospel, or canon as we refer to it, includes screenplays, the films, the radio dramas, novelizations. These works spin out of George Lucas's original stories. The rest are written by other writers. However, between us, we've read everything, and much of it is taken into account in the overall continuity. The entire catalog of published works comprises a vast history with many offshoots, variations, and tangents, like any other well-developed mythology. And this comes from the first issue of Star Wars Insider. Now, they do say here, to understand canon and continuity, the overall Star Wars saga should be looked at as a set of stories written by many different people which document past events. Although some stories are more reliable than others, they are all looked upon as being part of the overall history. It should be remembered that these are stories that simply that stories. There are numerous errors and that inevitably arise between the stories simply because different authors have their own way of telling the story and may not have the time and resources to perfectly align the details. This site deals with non-canon material by putting it in red text, and they let you know what it is. Okay, so the whole point here is they're explaining canon, right? How they view canon. Now, this is, again, what they dealt with the original, extended universe. It's not so much anymore. It's no longer considered canon, even though a lot of people wanted to. I always disagreed with that move, although I do now, later on, further understand why Disney did what they did. But my point doesn't necessarily change here. When you talk about canon in today's current structure, and I went back again, bring up The Mandalorian. The Darksaber was canon on 2 other shows. That would be, if you want to know more about that information is there. But they're also going to sit there and give it to you in a way that is digestible, and it's going to allow new people to come on into the fold, which is the whole point of these kind of shows and their interconnectivity. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has been brought to being the #1 franchise on the planet, the #1 franchise that's not going to be beat for the longest time, simply because of its canon and its continuity, and the fact that they take those things seriously. James here, like anyone who might defend his ludicrously, insanely researched and sourced article, doesn't understand why people like it. And I get that. You don't have to like it. You don't have to love it, but it exists and it's there with a reason and its intent. And if you want to sit there and criticize people who like Canon, that's fine, but I'm going to point and laugh at you as a result. Anyway, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your opinions. This is a long video. If you made it to the end, to do me a favor, type in Canon. I really appreciate that in the comment section. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that bell. I'll talk to you all later. Have yourself a great day. Thank you for watching, and may the force be with you always.